Hello everybody, my name is Chuck Walder. I'm the Geauga County Auditor.
And my name's Jim Flaiz. I'm the Geauga County Prosecutor.
I'd like to walk you through a presentation regarding COVID-19 issues and specifically on some funding we received through the CARES Act, which was a federal grant provided through the Ohio Office of Budget and Management. Under Ohio House Bill 481, CARES Act relief money was provided to local entities. House Bill 481 was very specific in how that money was distributed throughout the state. And in late June of 2020, Geauga County received $2,022,000 and some change of COVID relief money through the Ohio Office of Budget and Management. The CARES Act is a federal grant, and its distribution was laid out specifically in House Bill 481. They identified in House Bill 481 that the relief grant money would be distributed at a county level pursuant to the local government funding ratio. In that regard, it is still considered and will be audited as a federal grant, so we must be assured that we are following proper grant rules and that we don't deviate from that at all when spending the money. As I indicated earlier, this money is being administered through the Ohio Office of Budget and Management, but locally it's being administered through local county auditors. Geauga County's portion of this grant money is $823,000 and some change, and it has been allocated to the county specifically for COVID-19 expenditures. On the screen right now, you'll see a COVID relief fund eligibility and allocation chart indicating all of the local entities who have received this money pursuant to local government fund ratio. The only entity that is not included, which normally receive local government fund money, is the Park District. This was specifically excluded in House Bill 481, and therefore they're not included in the distribution. All but a handful of entities have already provided to my office a resolution requesting receipt of this COVID-19 relief money. We anticipate the balance of them submitting those resolutions in the near future, and we hope to distribute all $2 million of this money shortly thereafter.
If you are one of the townships that has not yet submitted your resolution of acceptance, please contact your assistant prosecutor and they will help you with that. We have forms that you can use. It's a pretty simple process, and then once your Board of Trustees passes that resolution, the auditor's office can distribute those funds to you.
Under House Bill 481, we are required to distribute money within 5 days of receiving the resolution requesting it. On October 15th, 2020, any money that is not encumbered in this particular relief fund must be returned back to the county for redistribution. That is a hard stop date built into House Bill 481, which basically means every entity who receives any funding pursuant to the CARES Act must encumber all the money by October 15th, or they must surrender the balance back to the county for redistribution.
This is not an issue for the county, as the auditor is going to encumber all of the county funds before the October date. However, if you're a township, you want to make sure that you encumber all of the funds. So you want to talk to your department heads, try to get as many expenses paid before the October date as possible. But even if you have money left over, encumber 100% of your money by that October date, because you still have until December 28th to spend the funds.
Once I receive that money back on October 15th, I must redistribute all money that I received by October 22nd. This would include money surrendered because it was not encumbered, or also money that was never initially distributed because a resolution was not provided. So in a sense, there are two rounds to this particular relief. Round one is included when you first ask for it under a resolution. Round two is this redistribution. The formula for redistribution is slightly different than the initial formula. The Ohio House Bill 481 states that on the redistribution, 25% would go to the county if they are eligible. They become eligible if they encumber all of their money by October 15th. Likewise, the balance will be distributed to all of the remaining qualifying entities based on their population. And again, these entities become qualified if they encumber all of their money on or before October 15th. And again, you should take note The second round distribution is not pursuant to the same rules as the first round. The first round was under local government fund ratio. The second round, other than the county, is on population. Money that is not expended or spent by December 28th must be returned directly to the state treasury. So every entity who receives a distribution is responsible for surrendering that money. It is not going to be brokered through the auditor's office. It'll go directly to the state treasurer.
This is one of the pitfalls that we've identified potentially for townships and the county. Even if you have encumbered the money and you've ordered a piece of equipment, for example, if you have not received it and you are not able to pay the bill by December 28th, the money is going to be gone. It will be sent back, and you will not be able to use that money. There is no then and now type situation with this money. The money will be gone, and you'll be stuck with the obligation, but you won't have the funds to pay it. So keep in mind, if you're getting late in the year, you have to have that product in hand, and you have to be able to pay that bill by December 28th.
The county money received, the $820-some thousand, is deposited in an auditor fund, which is fund number 2097. This fund is titled Local Coronavirus Relief Fund. That is the same name of the fund that is used by all local entities who are receiving similar funds. On your screen now is a New World image which represents the fund Local Coronavirus Relief. It also indicates all of the line items that we anticipate spending money for particular purposes related to COVID-19. You can see we populated some money under salaries. We've also populated money under contract services and also for repair services, equipment, advertising, training, and various other entities. So as you're getting your coronavirus expenditures prepared, you should bear in mind that we need to align your expenditures with a particular line item in the fund. If you're unsure of one of the line items, you're welcome to call my office or that of the prosecutor, or if in doubt, you can always use the line item other. We will be moving monies between these funds to be able to handle the various appropriations that people are bringing to our attention. The prosecutor's office and the auditor's office is working very closely together with the commissioners so that we ensure proper utilization of these grant funds. We do not wish to have any issues with the expenditures we're reimbursing or spending the grant money for. So in that regard, we'll be vetting each transaction to be sure it's in compliance with the grant requirements. We strongly encourage all departments and electeds to use these grant funds for COVID-related expenditures when possible. This is, in a sense, free money to the county. It is federal money being given to us, and we owe it to our taxpayers to best utilize spending their money in a judicious fashion. But bear in mind, this is a grant. So federal grant rules all apply, and the Ohio Revised Code still applies. So if you have conditions surrounding, for example, buying something that is in excess of $50,000 and you require multiple bids, it is your responsibility to obtain those bids to remain in compliance with the Ohio Revised Code. Likewise, if you're signing an agreement or a contract with an entity to perform some service during this period, it would be your obligation to have that contract certified prior to negotiating it with the apparent vendor. Eligibility of these funds is pretty widespread. All departments under the county's elected officials are participants automatically. So anybody that's working for one of the elected parties in the county, you are eligible by default to use these funds. Secondly, all departments under the commissioner's hiring authority are eligible participants in this fund utilization. There are, however, some agencies which are not automatically granted eligibility to use these grant monies. Those would require a sub-grant agreement between themselves and a parent. We can go through more detail of that as we proceed on with this PowerPoint. However, I want to identify who those other agencies are who are not automatically granted authorization and eligibility to use this grant money. Those parties include the Board of Elections, Veteran Services, Public Health, Board of DD, Mental Health. Only the Family First group under the Jobs and Family Services group would not be initially eligible unless they have a sub-grant agreement. Soil and Water, Solid Waste Management District, Park Districts, and lastly, schools. So any of these entities are able to participate, but they can only participate if there's a sub-grant approval agreement in place. So I have samples of the sub-grant agreements in the back of the room. In doing this presentation, I can provide those to you. They're pretty straightforward. I would recommend you work with your legal authority or the prosecutor's office to properly submit a sub-grant agreement to the respective agencies.
If you're a township, the sub-grant agreement is probably not going to apply to you. You do not need a sub-grant agreement for the township police department or the township fire department. However, one area where this is going to impact townships would be with a private fire company. So if the fire department operating in your township is not a township department, it is a fire company or a private entity, if they want to spend this money or want to seek reimbursement for PPE or other supplies that they've already purchased because of COVID, then they're going to need to do a sub-grant agreement with your township. If that issue comes up, contact your assistant prosecutor. Chuck has prepared a sample sub-grant agreement that's included in the materials, but we can work with you to get the fire company or whatever other entity, could be a park district also if it's in a township, but we'll work with you to do that sub-grant so that those funds can be made available to that group if the Board of Trustees wants that to happen.
There are two purchasing scenarios that I'd like to go over with conformance to House Bill 481 in order to leverage and utilize this grant money for COVID-19 expenditures. The first scenario is for purchases where a department or an elected entity utilized their funds to buy items COVID-19 related and wish to be reimbursed for those purchases. The second scenario are for larger purchases which would be purchased directly from the relief fund. So what we anticipate is going forward, if you're buying smaller items like hand sanitizers, disinfectant wipes, and they're nominal in price, I recommend that you continually use your funds and then get reimbursed for those expenditures. If, however, you're replacing some equipment or you're doing shielding for isolation between your employees and the general public, those kind of purchases, which are generally more costly and are probably larger in scale, it may be to your advantage to have those orders placed directly using funds from the relief fund, because you may or may not have adequate funds in your current budget to be able to move monies around to be able to secure those purchases. So we'll go through each of these particular scenarios in detail and advise you of the procedure you need to follow in order to secure those monies.
For township purposes, so for reimbursement, you will have everything in the COVID fund. This is where it deviates from the county's procedure a little bit. You'll have everything in your COVID fund. If your police department, for example, purchased PPE or purchased some other item directly related to COVID, then you're going to be looking at a reimbursement between the time you're submitting these bills, looking backwards to the March 1st date. If it's a reimbursement, you can process that as a fiscal officer out of your COVID fund and reimburse that line item that may have been populated from the general fund or even a levy fund. So if you have a police levy that originally funded that purchase, you want to refund that fund from the COVID fund and move that money back over there for reimbursements. Going forward in the township, you can do either way. So township can have the departments spend money out of their fund and reimburse them, or what we feel is easier, the township can just directly pay for those purchases, the fiscal officer, out of the COVID fund for the benefit of those various township departments.
So first we're going to go over purchases using your funds. So these would include items in the past that you've purchased using your funds and have already paid for, or perhaps going forward using funds that you currently have in your budget. And the important thing to note is the eligible time frame for you to be able to submit for reimbursement items you purchased is from March 1st of this year through December 28th. Any purchases that you made prior to March 1st are ineligible for reimbursement using these monies. And likewise, any purchases after December 28th are not eligible to be reimbursed. Secondly, it is important to note that you must spend the money as of December 28th, not just encumber it. So when you're spending your own funds to buy items, if you were to buy something late in the year and then not turn those monies into me until after December 28th, there are no funds available to be reimbursed. Likewise, if the expenditure is dated after December 28th, it is not permitted to use this grant money to pay for those expenditures. It is also important to note that you can't just capture the money through an encumbrance and then expect to be reimbursed if it falls after December 28th. Internally, because we shut down the county finances before the end of the year in order to do end of year closing, we are asking for the cutoff date to be December 15th for your submission of these particular reimbursements and purchases. So keep that in mind when ordering these items. Do it early. You can do it often, but don't wait till the 11th hour because A, there may not be funds available if they're all consumed, or B, we may not be able to get these funds to you in the time necessary to meet the grant fulfillment. The other item to keep in mind is if you've already budgeted for a particular item specifically in a line item in your budget, you cannot use these funds to be reimbursed. So if, for example, in a line item in your budget, you specified you're buying hand sanitizer and you budgeted $200, that $200 that you budgeted would not be able to be reimbursed through the funds. However, if you are budgeting in a more global sense, so you're saying it's office supplies and that's inclusive of hand sanitizer, there is nothing in that budget that indicates what amount you've allocated to hand sanitizer, and therefore these funds would be available for reimbursement. What we're asking you to do is take the information that we're going to lay out here for you and submit it electronically to an email address that we've set up specifically for reimbursing you using these COVID funds. That email address is covid@gcauditor.com. The information we'd like you to send is if you've already bought something and the entire voucher was COVID related. So you bought hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes, perhaps some paper products, all going toward COVID expenditures. All you need to provide us is the warrant number. Once we receive the warrant number, we will match it to your voucher and pull your evidentiary matter. If, however, the voucher that you are asking us to reimburse you for has multiple items on it, and some of which are not COVID related, we need to know which items are COVID only specific. So what we would ask you to do is submit to us through that same email address a copy of the voucher with the COVID items highlighted. So specifically, we'd like you to, if you bought 3 items out of 10 that are COVID, we need you to identify through highlighting that these are the particular items that you want reimbursement for under COVID. The second thing we ask you for is to provide us with the category of the COVID-19 expenditure. So that goes back to a couple of slides ago where we showed you, would it be materials and supplies? Would it be equipment? What particular line item out of that fund would we attribute your COVID expenditures to pertain to? If in doubt, you're welcome to email us or call us or pick other, and we will try to disseminate from that which line item to attach it to. The other item you need to supply us is called an Assertion of Necessity memo. And this must be executed by the highest level of authority that's submitting the information. So in the case of, for example, maintenance, the maintenance director would be the person signing this particular memo. If it's coming from an elected office, like my office or the treasurer's office, it would be either myself or the treasurer that would have to sign it. We will go into great detail of what needs to be included in this assertion and what the form of that assertion is. And this is a very important aspect of this particular grant that we must be in compliance with. So we'll spend quite a bit of time in the next few minutes here discussing the Assertion of Necessity memo. Once we receive this information electronically at covid@gcauditor.com, my office will perform the following. So we will first validate your submission if you're giving us the warrant number to the voucher in our files. We will pull all evidentiary matter, and we will make sure that we are in alignment with you that this is in fact COVID-related expenditure. On the occasion that we don't agree that the item you're trying to be reimbursed for is a valid COVID expenditure, we will consult with the prosecutor's office to determine whether or not he sees that it could be in compliance with the grant. We will also have dialogue with the person submitting it to be sure we have clarity in what exactly they're trying to get reimbursed for. Once we receive the okay that everything appears to be related to COVID-19 and it's in regards to the grant requirements, we will then submit the items that you're asking for reimbursement to the commissioners for them to pass what's called a resolution of acceptance, where they will agree to use COVID funds to reimburse your budget for these items that you purchased related to COVID-19. We will then perform a cash transfer reimbursing your fund before December 28th. We anticipate doing this on a weekly or bi-weekly basis as the requests for reimbursements come in.
The resolution of acceptance that is referenced by Chuck for the commissioners, the prosecutor's office has created a sample resolution of acceptance for the Board of Township Trustees, and we are pushing that information out along with this presentation to all the different townships. So we do have a sample form. You will need to refer back, if you look at the sample form, you will need to refer back to your original resolution accepting the funds when the auditor distributed those to you. So it does reference back to that, but the resolution of acceptance will be the official action from the Board of Trustees or the county commissioners on the county level. It will be the official action approving the expenditure and again linking it to COVID-19.
We also want to be able to monitor the cash remaining in the fund so that we don't run short of cash, and then of course people are going to be disappointed they're not reimbursed. So again, I strongly recommend you get your particular invoices or your vouchers or your warrant numbers in quickly and early, and that you do it oftentimes as you're repurchasing items. So don't wait till the 11th hour to get all of your receipts together or to get all of your reimbursements in. We are on a time crunch, and it is before the end of the year we must expend these monies. The last thing I want to point out is we are cutting it off on December 15th, so keep in mind we do not want people to be buying a lot of items after December 15th and before December 28th, because we won't have enough time in the year to reimburse you properly. The second scenario we're going to go over is when you are buying something directly using the relief fund. Again, the same time requirements are required using the relief fund directly as it was for reimbursement. So the purchase must be between March 1st and December 28th. We cannot accept anything prior to March 1st, and we will not accept any purchases after December 28th. And again, these funds must be spent by December 28th, not just encumbered. Now we're going to back up our hard stop at the auditor's office to November 30th, and that is to give us adequate time to chase down invoices so that we can in fact get this money expended by the 28th. Again, the 28th is a hard stop number for the grant, and we don't want to have a bunch of money being allocated to using grant funds that we can't exactly expend by December 28th. So that number for our internal use is November 30th.
Remember, this is not like a normal fund or a normal budgeting process. The money has to be sent back on December 28th. So on December 29th, the money's gone. It's not there to spend anymore. So you really have to make sure that you have those purchases, have the products. This is not something that you should be thinking about in December. It's something you should be thinking about in August.
Once again, just like in reimbursements, you cannot have already budgeted the item in your current budget. We're asking you to submit the following information to the same email address that we indicated earlier. That is covid@gcauditor.com. If you want us to provide you with relief using the relief fund monies directly, we need a quote and or the information regarding the item that you want us to purchase. If you were required to get multiple bids, you need to provide those bids. If it's a contract that needs certification, you need to provide us that contract. We will then take it from there and either place the order or get the contract certified on your behalf. You also need to properly complete a new vendor form if you're using a new vendor that is not already in our system. And again, please understand this adds time to the process. You need to factor that into your equation about your submissions. We are also asking you to categorize your COVID-19 expenditure. Just as you would on reimbursement, tell us what you believe this expenditure would best match up with the available items that we've indicated in the COVID fund, and then we can match the two up and have a good accounting for these purchases. And then lastly, you also need to include with it an assertion of necessity memo, again signed by the highest level of authority. We will go through this in greater detail in the next couple of slides. What my office will do at that point is we will consult with the prosecutor's office on items that we can't resolve as being COVID related. For example, you may be asking us to buy 150 ballpoint pens, and you're indicating that those are COVID-19 expenditures. To the average observer, that may not be COVID related. However, in talking with you and or the prosecutor's office, we may determine that, for example, you may be putting these pens out for the general public's use and you don't want them returned. You don't want to have to disinfect them. That would then become an available COVID expenditure for you to use this process to be reimbursed for or to be paid for directly from the relief fund. Once we get a submission that is okayed by the prosecutor's office, we will then apply to the commissioners for a resolution of acceptance, just as we did with the reimbursement fund. And then finally, we will place the order on your behalf and we will notify you to that effect. So it becomes very important at this point that the information you provided us gives us a good, clean shipping address and the party that they can contact in order, if they have any questions, or in order to arrange for either a vendor to come in to do work for you or to ship and have you receive the property that they're sending to you. I do not have the facilities to house everything in my office, so I do not want the ship to addresses for all the items that you wish us to purchase as being my office location. If this is going to ADP, for example, we need to have an agreed address where we can ship it. If it's going to maintenance, that would be something we need to work out with maintenance. And then what would happen is, once the item is received, we will secure payment using direct funds from the COVID Relief Fund grant money. That process cannot be performed, however, until we actually get an invoice and that we have acknowledgement from you that you received the items. So that acknowledgement can be in the form of a packing slip, or it can be in the form of an email simply stating, I got the stuff. Either one is acceptable, but we're going to need that in order to process payment for these invoices. And again, it is important that we remember the cutoff date for these items is November 30th. We can't wait till in December to be ordering these and receiving it. And we anticipate we will have a short period of time in the early December window where we can hound some of the vendors to make sure we get invoices, deliveries, and receipts. We're going to spend quite a bit of time now talking about this assertion of necessity memo, which is a really vital component in this grant money and its proper use.
I keep joking with Chuck when we were doing these presentations that this is the most important slide in the PowerPoint presentation. If you're going to take anything away from this, it's that you need this assertion of necessity memo, and Chuck's going to go over examples that he's prepared, but that is what is linking the expenditure to COVID-19 and is really going to help you with any audit headaches. That assertion of necessity memo needs to be attached to whatever invoice you're paying under this grant. And it's a critical function, and these items need to be part of every memo, and Chuck's going to go over those now.
There are a few things that are required to be included in this assertion of necessity memo. The first of which is you need to positively assert that the items that you are purchasing are from March 1st through December 28th. You also need to positively assert that these are necessary expenditures which are incurred due to the public health emergency related to COVID-19. You also need to indicate that these purchases were not accounted for in your most recent budget, and the particular House Bill 481 language indicates March 27th of this year as being that budget cutoff time. And lastly, this particular memo needs to be signed by the highest level of authority. Electeds should sign it in their particular areas. However, the commissioners have asked for a two-step process for signatures. That would be the director and then somebody from the commissioner's office. So either Jerry or Adrian will probably have to be the secondary signatures on the assertion so that we are in full compliance with both the grant as well as the wishes of the commissioner's office.
For townships, I feel that the assertion of necessity memo could be signed by the fiscal officer. However, if it's for a township department, you could have your road superintendent, you could have your police chief, your fire chief. They could be the ones signing the assertion of necessity memo. But for any township expense, I feel that the fiscal officer could be the signatory on that assertion of necessity memo.
What you see on the screen now are various examples which we are included for your use of assertion of necessity memos. So we're going to walk through 5 different scenarios of assertion of necessity memos. It is important to note that these assertions of necessity memos are really nothing more than letters to yourself indicating the various things that you are purchasing and why you are establishing them to be COVID-19 expenditures. I did mine on my own office letterhead. The body of the letter is really where the meat of the argument is. And let's just go through these sample by sample. So this is one expenditure where I am asserting that pursuant to House Bill 481, I needed to buy various items that are due to the public health emergency, directly attributed to COVID-19. And I'm buying them since March 1st, 2020. So that's the first check mark to say I'm indicating the time period and I'm indicating that it is a public health emergency requirement. The last paragraph has to do with the fact that these items were not previously anticipated or budgeted. So that's the second item that we need to check off. And then in the body, in the middle paragraph, is really where I assert what it is I'm buying and why it's COVID-19 related. So in this particular example, I'm using the argument that I had to buy 9 laptop computers along with various accessories and some licenses in order to be able to provide laptop computer connectivity to people working from home during COVID-19. So these people were able to take these laptops home, use the various licenses to connect to the county's network and get data off of our servers or get data out of our ERP system. This next example has to do with a variety of things that we are purchasing on an ongoing basis. So rather than have to do assertion of necessity memos every time you buy face masks, for example, I've done a global assertion whereby I'm again meeting the requirement of telling you that it is due to House Bill 481's grant requirements, it is after March 1st, it is due to the public health emergency, and it's not being budgeted for by my normal anticipated budget. However, I've indicated that the items that I'm approving for purchase include face masks, hand sanitizer, disinfecting wipes, spray disinfectant, paper towels, protective gloves, and thermometers. So if you order every week, for example, or every couple of weeks, whenever you can get hand sanitizer, you can just copy this assertion and include it with that particular purchase when you want reimbursement. You don't have to create new assertions every time you buy the same items over and over again. The third example has to do with buying office furniture. So we determined in our office that we have a lot of cloth office chairs, especially in conference areas where we have the public coming in to sit through various meetings, including Budget Commission or Board of Revision hearings. Those office chairs, being cloth, are virtually impossible to disinfect on an ongoing basis. So we are proposing that we buy non-cloth chairs, either leather, leather-like, or vinyl chairs, to replace the cloth chairs so that we can disinfect them between visits by the public. Again, I caution you to just go by just not going out and buying a single desk chair for an individual that is not being used by multiple parties. The argument is a single individual's cloth chair is probably not needed to be disinfectant because it is not being used by multiple people. However, if you're buying a group of chairs in a conference room or an entire office that has a conference facility, you may want to convert all the chairs over to something that you can clean or disinfect.
One of the townships approached me with a question kind of along these lines, and it was, our meeting room has carpeting and we want to replace the carpeting. Well, my initial response was, well, no, you can't use this money to replace carpeting. And they went further and said, well, we're replacing the carpeting with a tile floor so that we have a hard surface that we can sanitize and clean between meetings, because the meeting room's used for a number of purposes. And my opinion was that absolutely you could use these funds for that type of purchase. So a lot of this is being able to word it right in your assertion of necessity memo. Just saying you're replacing carpet is not going to get you there. But saying that you're replacing carpeting with a solid surface because the meeting room is used by the public and you need to disinfect it or clean it periodically, that added information in the memo is what's going to justify that purchase, give you less headaches at audit time, and really give you smooth sailing through this process. So our office, the prosecutor's office, is happy to help you with wording on those memos, but keep in mind that replacing things, that's not what they want to hear. Replacing with something that is going to be able to be disinfected or upgrading because of COVID, those are items that are going to be acceptable under this grant.
The fourth example has to do with somebody who's perhaps being given equipment to work from home, but you then discover at a later point in time that you want to include more technological equipment for their use so that they can become more proficient. So in our case, we have a person who is using a home laptop computer that we provided for COVID, but we found that them not having a printer or a scanner was really reducing their effectiveness. So this is my assertion that I need to buy a multipurpose scanner and printer and the necessary supplies in order to make them proficient while working from home. So there's really no limit to what you can attribute to COVID-19, provided that not having that particular equipment makes them inefficient and that you are only buying that particular equipment because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The last example is kind of a hybrid, and that is, for example, we saw no reason why we couldn't stockpile, if you will, printers so that we can provide them to various people who are working from home. So this is an example of an expenditure that we're asking to allow ADP to buy three multi-purpose printers and scanners so that when people work from home, we can rotate this equipment between various people. Maybe the people are only working 2 weeks off-site, and then they're back in the office and different people are going off-site. So we would transfer this equipment from one party to the next with very little requirement of having to disinfect. It would be very difficult with a laptop because we'd have to re-image the computer, but in the case of a printer, we simply can move it from party to party. So let's talk about the potential expenditures that are obvious for you to use COVID-19 monies to be reimbursed for or pay for. First, I think it's obvious that PPE items are no doubt COVID-19 related. Masks, gloves, face shields, and the category you would attribute those to are materials and supplies. Next, disinfectant sprays, wipes, hand sanitizers. Again, I think that's pretty obvious. It's COVID-19 related, and that would be under the category materials and supplies as well. But next we have office shielding, barriers, signage, that type of thing. So if your office put up a temporary or a permanent shield to form as a barrier between the public and your workers, or if you put signage to indicate, please maintain your safe distancing, or you put stickers on the floor, all of those kind of items would be COVID-19 related. And it's important to note that these cannot be attributed to security measures. They must be attributed to COVID-19. You would use one of two different categories, I think, to identify the expenditures. One would be if you farmed out the service, the building of the shielding, for example, to a vendor. That would be under contract services, building maintenance. Or if our maintenance department did it, we would buy the materials and supplies under the material and supply category. And then if, for example, they had to install it for you, some salaries may be able to be used. Now, we caution the use of salaries. We believe that the best and cleanest approach to using salaries as a valid expenditure, reimbursement, or use would be if it's used only in the aspect of it was used above and beyond the normal workday. So in this example, what we would recommend is if you bought materials and you're having them installed, if they were installed in either off hours or on a weekend and they were consuming overtime, even though you may have paid people more money, we recommend doing it that way because it's the cleaner line. The argument will come into play if we're using maintenance people during their normal workday to do this kind of work and we're trying to justify using COVID reimbursement money to offset that cost. We fall under the scrutiny of what would they have been doing if they weren't doing that COVID related work? Would they be doing something similar? And that becomes a very, very gray area that both myself and the prosecutor feel we should not go on that ground.
Chuck's right. One of the other pitfalls we see, what the people that are going to be auditing this grant and what the federal and state government, what they didn't want was us using this money to pay for stuff that we were already going to pay for anyway. And that's where it becomes complicated paying employees. you have these employee costs anyway. They've already been budgeted for. And if you're trying to pay salaries, that is going to be a real red flag under this grant. So I think Chuck's absolutely right. The cleanest way to do it is, hey, our guys had to come in on a Saturday. We paid them overtime. It was 5 hours of overtime outside their normal work hours, and it's directly COVID related. That is the cleanest, easiest way to do it. Anything beyond that, paying salaries that you normally would have paid anyway, becomes a little messy. I have really pretty significant concerns about that, and I don't think it's going to be worth the trouble at audit time to try to pay those salaries with these funds. So I would avoid that if possible, unless it's an example where it's very clear-cut.
Another item that was a typical expenditure are people working from home. So if you needed to buy computers, extra monitors, peripherals, cameras, speakers, that kind of thing, that is perfectly permissible. If you're replacing computers, however, that would not be a valid COVID expenditure. So if you already offered somebody a computer to work from home prior to COVID-19 and you wish to buy a computer to replace that computer, it would not be COVID related. However, if you didn't anticipate them using a computer and working from home prior to COVID-19, and then COVID-19 hit and you were required to put them into that particular work environment, we do believe that computers and peripherals are valid expenditures under the equipment category. Furniture, as I described in my earlier example, you're replacing a bunch of public used chairs which are cloth and unable to be sanitized with a material that is able to be wiped down periodically between people's visits. That would be a valid expenditure and used under equipment. I think the argument has come up in other presentations. What about areas where the public uses that is carpeted? Could you replace the carpeting with a solid surface so that you could disinfect the floor? I see no reason why you couldn't. Even if your carpet is old, I think the argument could be used. You're replacing it now because of COVID-19. So you want to assure that you're not doing it just because it's time for replacement. You didn't budget to already replace it, and you're replacing it with something that can be disinfected, which before could not be disinfected. Cleaning of workspace. If you're currently having your office cleaned on a more regular basis than you were prior to COVID-19, the difference between what you were paying before and what you are paying now is a valid expenditure that can be paid for out of this grant money. So if it's outside services, that would be considered contract services or cleaning services. And then the last example would be virtual meetings. I think everyone has accepted the fact that we're using more WebEx and Zoom licenses to do virtual meetings, but we've also had to buy equipment in order to accommodate that. So it could have been a dedicated machine to do nothing but WebEx meetings. That could be a laptop or a normal computer. It could have been buying cameras and microphones for people's desktop computers. All of those kind of things are valid provided you're buying it for COVID-19. And again, the category would be under contract services if it's for the licenses. But again, remember, you can only deduct the contract services between March 1st and December 28th. If you're buying a one-year subscription to WebEx, you must prorate it over the window of time that this grant is being authorized to be consumed. But all of your other items, the cameras, equipment, and microphones would all be done under the equipment category. That concludes our presentation. If you have questions regarding COVID-19 expenditures and your reimbursement or use of the COVID funds, please don't hesitate to contact my office or the prosecutor's office, and we'll be happy to answer and work with you on any questions you have.
I just want to thank the auditor, Chuck Walder, and the entire staff at the auditor's office. They obviously did an enormous amount of work on this, and I haven't seen any other counties really laying this out to try to help the different townships and county departments and offices in navigating what is a pretty difficult and complex grant situation. So I want to thank Chuck and reiterate, if you do have questions, legal questions, please contact your APA, your assistant prosecutor. We can help you with that. We can help you with wording on your memos. And our hope is that we can use these funds to help lessen the burden for our taxpayers.